Hey everyone, Rua here with another foray into history and mythology. We're now 5 entries into this series and I'm glad I'm keeping it going. History and mythology have been 2 of my keen interests, beginning as hobbies before becoming something more. I'm actually aiming to teach them in some capacity in future, so being able to talk about the same found in Vana'diel is always a pleasure. Okay, into it. Starting in England, we have 2 famous swords. The Ascalon was the sword of St. George. Also known as George of Lydda, George is venerated as a saint of Christianity and as one of the 14 holy helpers, where he is considered the patron saint of soldiers. According to legend, George was a soldier of the Roman army. He was a soldier specifically of the Praetorian Guard for the Roman Emperor Diocletian. George was ultimately sentenced to death for refusing to renounce his Christian faith. You see, Christianity was punishable by death until Diocletian's successor, Emperor Constantine, passed the Edict of Tolerance, which protected Christians within the empire. St. George is also the patron saint of England, adopted in the Middle Ages because he was the personification of the ideals of Christian chivalry. The red cross of St. George's heraldry, commonly featured in his many depictions, became the iconic national flag of England. To this day, St. George's death is marked by a holiday, the 23rd of April of each year in England. The story of St. George and the Dragon is one of the most enduring in English history. Since George lived in the late 3rd century, the tale has pre-Christian origins, rather before Christianity rose to prominence in Europe. Considering this, his legend has endured very well. The tale was truly popularized in Western tradition in the 13th century when it was published in the Golden Legend. Initially entitled Legenda Sanctorum, or the Readings of the Saints, it gained its popularity under the title for which it is best known. As the story goes, a kingdom was plagued by a venomous dragon dwelling in a lake, poisoning its countryside. To prevent it from affecting the city itself, the city's people offered it 2 sheep daily, and finally their children chosen by lottery. One time, the lot fell on the king's daughter. The king offered all of his gold and silver to have his daughter spared, but the people refused. His daughter was sent out to the lake, dressed as a bride, to be fed to the dragon. St. George arrived by chance at the spot. The princess tried to send him away, but he vowed to remain and protect her. When the dragon emerged, St. George charged it on horseback, eventually heavily wounding it with his lance as he struck true. Rather than immediately killing the dragon, St. George was struck by an inspiration. The princess and St. George led the dragon back to the city. St. George offered to kill the dragon if the people consented to becoming baptized in the Christian faith. Awestruck at George's ability and believing divine intervention to have played some small measure, 15,000 men, including the king, converted to Christianity. George then killed the dragon, beheading it with his sword. This sword was the Ascalon. Considering the tale of St. George and the Dragon, the attributes of the Ascalon of Vana'diel make sense. The Ascalon deals light damage exclusively to dragons, the light elemental damage possibly a reference to St. George's revered status in Christianity, and the dragon-specific effect is an unmistakable reference to his most famous tale with it. The Arondight was the sword of Lancelot de l'Arc, the first and greatest of the Knights of the Round Table. The Knights of the Round Table were a fellowship of knights in the court of Camelot, the court of King Arthur. The knights aided their liege in the protection of the realm and embarked on quests, the most famous of these quests being the quest for the Holy Grail. The reason Camelot had a round table was simple. It showed that none of the knights there held major status over each other and symbolized that they were a true fellowship of equals. Although the knights varied in combat prowess, they each brought valued skills to the fellowship. It's been written by several authors that Lancelot was the greatest swordsman of all the Knights of the Round Table. He was also very intelligent and known for both his charm and humour. Legend tells us that as a child, Lancelot was left by his parents, King Ban of Benwick and Queen Elaine, on the shores of the Lake of Avalon, where he was found by Nimue, the Lady of the Lake. Caring for him as her own, Nimue fostered and raised Lancelot. Nimue is famous for having gifted Excalibur to Arthur, but she was also responsible for the creation of Arondight, which she gave to Lancelot. Before he joined King Arthur's court, Lancelot roamed as a knight-errant unaware of his royal heritage, only going by the title of the White Knight. When he liberated the castle of Dolorous Guard single-handedly by using Arondight to defeat its entire garrison of fallen knights, he discovered that the castle was actually the same home his parents had been made to flee from when he was a child. Famously, Lancelot finds his true name by opening a tomb in the depths of the castle with his name on it. With his identity regained and his chivalry proven, Lancelot becomes the first knight in King Arthur's fellowship. If this sounds familiar, it's because George R.R. Martin based aspects of Jon Snow's character and story off of Lancelot. The resemblances between Lancelot and the Game of Thrones hero are definitely there. Lancelot was the most trusted knight and companion of King Arthur, but nothing so good ever lasts in mythology. Through a long and complicated set of circumstances, Lancelot and Arthur's wife Guinevere began an affair which fractured the court of Camelot and eventually led to King Arthur's downfall. After Arthur's death at the hands of Mordred, Lancelot lived the rest of his life as a hermit in penitence. How's that for another similarity? The Arondight of Vana'diel has an additional effect of water damage with each hit, which seems to be inspired by one of Lancelot's names, Lancelot of the Lake or Lancelot du Lac, deriving from his being raised by Nimue, who also crafted the blade. Herkuleskeule means Hercules in Finnish. Hercules, or Heracles if you're going off of the original Greek, is easily the best known hero of Greek mythology. Heracles was the son of Zeus by Alcmene, a mortal woman. Oh, say it isn't so, Zeus. He was originally given the name Alcleus by his mother. Zeus's wife, Hera, was understandably jealous and sought to destroy Alcleus. She probably went too far though, driving him mad, causing him to murder his wife, Megara, you didn't see that in the Disney film, and their 2 children. When he regained his wits, he was distraught by what he had done, and sought out the oracle at Delphi for advice. There, Apollo told him to serve Eurystheus, the king of Tyrus, as a penance. During his time at Tyrus, Alcleus was tasked to perform the 12 labours for which he became incredibly famous. After completing these tasks, he was renamed Heracles. The name is actually very ironic. Heracles literally means the glory of Hera. If Hera hadn't driven him mad in the first place, he would have never performed the 12 labours and won immortal glory. In trying to break Heracles, Hera had only ensured his glory. During his 12 labours, Heracles accumulated a myriad of weapons, but his most iconic weapon is the one he used in the first of the 12. Heracles' first task was to slay the Nemean lion, a lion with skin impervious to conventional weapons. Heracles knew that piercing and slashing weapons were essentially useless against the lion, so he instead used an olive wood club, a blunt weapon, stunning it so he could more easily strangle it. Once it was dead, Heracles used the club once again to break off the lion's claws, which he discovered could penetrate its skin. He skinned the lion and used its pelt as armor for the rest of his adventures. The club in Vana'diel that bears Heracles' name isn't an ultimate weapon by any means, feeling like a real missed opportunity. Still, it was a decent damage-dealing club for its time. Perhaps, just perhaps, since the Finnish translation of Heracles' name was used for this club, his true name could be used for a future weapon. We're long overdue a powerful DPS club after all. The Gae Bolg was a legendary weapon from Irish Celtic mythology, and certainly one of the strangest. Gae Bolg means the spear of mortal pain and was the signature weapon of Cuchulainn. To say Cuchulainn has a lot of tales attributed to him is a bit of an understatement. Suffice to say, Cuchulainn performed enough superhuman feats to put him on par with the likes of Achilles, who he's often compared to due to their affinity of using a spear. Cuchulainn's real name was actually Setanta. He got the name he is better known for when he accidentally killed the guard-hound of the legendary blacksmith Culainn. Setanta guarded Culainn's home and workshop until the pup of the hound had grown and been trained. It's from this early tale in his life that Cuchulainn got his new name, which literally means Hound of Culainn. As his legend grew, however, he became wider known as the Hound of Ulster, on account of the terrifying feral berserker state, or Eastrad, he could enter in battle. In order to temper his incredible power and to win the heart of the woman he loved, Emma, Cuchulainn was made to train under the warrior goddess Skaha. This is where Cuchulainn received the Gae Bolg. Skaha kept careful watch over this spear as she knew its power, and only relinquished it once she had taught Cuchulainn the proper way to use it. Made from the bones of a sea monster known as the Cureid, The most unique and gruesome feature of the Gae Bolg was in the way it utterly decimated its victims. Upon piercing a body, the tip of the Gae Bolg could be made to expand into 30 barbs, effectively pincushioning its victim from the inside. There was therefore no way of removing the spear without tearing out most of the victim's internal organs, and likely most of their skeleton along with it for good measure. When Queen Maeve invaded Ulster, it was down to Cuchulainn to take on her entire army, since a curse had fallen upon the fighting men of Ulster which put them out of action. Since Cuchulainn was 17 and technically not a fully grown man at that point, he was exempt. It took all he had, but Cuchulainn held off the invading army with the Gae Bolg, probably leaving an unfathomable mess on the battlefield until the curse lifted and the men of Ulster came to his aid. The Gae Bolg of Vana'diel is a long outdated weapon, though it is the ultimate weapon for dragoons in Final Fantasy XIV unless I'm not mistaken. For its time at the level 75 cap, the Gae Bolg was a strong dragoon polearm, having a base damage comparable to non-relic options. What stands out was its water resistance, which might be a reference to it being forged from the bones of the Kurid. Anguta is the god of the dead in Inuit mythology. Known as the Father, Anguta carries the souls of the departed down to Adlavun, the underworld. The souls he takes must sleep for a year before they are allowed to ascend, where they will enjoy eternal bliss. Anguta's role is that of a psychopomp. Psychopomps are spirits, animals, angels, or deities who escort souls from the land of the living to the land of the dead. Psychopomps have existed in the beliefs of cultures for millennia. To just use a few other examples, Anubis is the judge of the dead in Egyptian mythology, and arguably the most famous psychopomp of them all. Archangel Michael is the Christian psychopomp who guards and escorts the souls of the righteous to heaven. Finally, the Haitian voodoo revered the charismatic loa Baron Samedi, easily the most colourful and surprisingly jovial of what is a very solemn bunch. Why is Anguta's namesake given to its scythe though? Well, I have a few theories. There's an association between scythes and the concept of death, and psychopomps by extension. The scythe is an image that reminds us that death claims souls like a farmer who harvests his crops when their time comes. Next, there's the weapon skill on the Anguta scythe, entropy. Entropy is a term used to describe disorder and uncertainty, a process of degradation and running down towards nothingness. Death is the ultimate destination of all living things, so it being on a scythe, an icon of death, is rather fitting. Finally, Anguta's name means man with something to cut, which is suitable for such a devastating scythe that bears his name. The Anguta scythe is absolutely massive, easily among the largest weapons in Vana'diel, and it looks like it would do a lot of damage at first glance. Putting it all together, and it's a good reference to a very obscure figure. The seven-branched sword, also known as the Nanatsusaya-no-tachi, is one of the national treasures of Japan. As far as swords go, the Nanatsusaya-no-tachi is very unique. It has 6 branch-like protrusions along the central blade which give it its name, the 7th branch of course being the blade's tip. The sword is currently housed in the Asanokami Shrine in Nara Prefecture, and it's not shown to the wider public, but that hasn't stopped a plethora of replicas being made. Replicas are displayed throughout Japan and South Korea. Yep, you heard me there, South Korea. There's a reason for this. Archaeologists and historians in the two countries have speculated how a blade clearly of Korean design ended up in Japan. This part of the Nanatsusaya-no-tachi's history is universally agreed on, as its distinct design is indicative of Korean tree motifs which featured on artwork and treasures of the Bakje kingdom of Korean antiquity. We're going back in time to just before the turn of the 4th century, bear with me. What isn't agreed on is why it ended up in Japan. One theory prominent among Japanese historians holds that the blade was part of a tribute to the Yamato ruler of Japan. On the flip side, some Korean historians believe that the relationship between the two kingdoms was reversed. Japan was the vassal state. What you have here is a historiographical debate that's still ongoing, and I'm going to weigh in myself. History tells us that relations between the southern Korean kingdoms and Yamato Japan were good in the 4th century, and that a decent amount of cultural exchange was already happening given their proximity. This is further supported by the fact that there is an inscription on the side of the blade that reads, "Never before has there been such a blade. The crown prince of the king of Bakje had this sword for the king of Wa in the hope that it may be passed on to future generations." Wa is the oldest name attributed to Japan from Korean texts. After the fall of Bakje in the late 7th century at the hands of Tang Dynasty China, refugees of Bakje fled to Japan and were taken in. This wave of immigration was instrumental in Japan's development in the Nara and Heian periods. Relations between Japan and Korea didn't really crater in a major way until the Imjin War of the late 16th century. I therefore believe that this blade was a gift from one royal family to another. It was just that, a gift demonstrating mutual respect. Apart from its craftsmanship, why is the Nanatsusaya-no-tachi relevant on a cultural level in Japan? It appears across too many forms of media to count after all. Well, for two reasons. The first is that the sword's existence lends credence to the existence of Empress Jingu, a semi-mythical figure who ruled Japan in its earliest years. Popular belief in Japan is that the sword in Isanokami Shrine is the same 7-branched sword mentioned in the Nihon Shoki, a text which chronicles Japan's early history. The sword mentioned in the text itself is referred to as a gift from the Bakje king to a Yamato ruler, exactly what it says on the sword. The second reason is because the sword indicates that there was once a genuine and respectful relationship between Japan and Korea. Relations between the two were very tumultuous from the 17th century onwards, but the Nanatsusaya-no-tachi remains an icon that the nations retain a close connection through it all. The Nanatsusaya-no-tachi of Vanadil was an incredible weapon during the level 75 cap era, since it fully capped a samurai Zanshin trait, something that no other JSC piece in the game does to this very day. The problem was getting your hands on it, which wasn't very likely at the time since it was a treasure of the Pandemonium Warden. Still, its in-game model is a spot-on adaptation of the real sword, and such attention to detail should be praised. Okay, that's all for this entry. See you next time.